Mr. President, I rise today on the important issue of funding the Department of Homeland Security and to urge my colleagues to come together and pass a clean appropriation bill with regard to this agency. The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, is charged with border security and immigration enforcement. DHS's role extends far beyond immigration. The agency is also responsible for aviation security, emergency management and response, counterterrorism, and cybersecurity. Democrats and Republicans have long worked together to make sure our hardworking federal officers on the border, in our airports, and at our ports can continue their critical work that keeps us safe. Now, the Republican-controlled House would irresponsibly risk shutting down the Department of Homeland Security to score political points over the president's immigration actions. Today, I object to the effort to shut down DHS over the president's immigration executive action because it is not only an irresponsible strategy from a security point of view, but it comes with a real cost in the everyday lives of students and parents. Funding for the Department of Homeland Security is set to expire February 27th. The president has been clear he will veto any policy riders that undo his executive action and harm millions of students and their families. The House Republican bill forces us to choose between shutting down the Department of Homeland Security or deporting children and families. This is an untenable choice. Looking at the votes in the House, it is clear some members of Congress would on one hand say our immigration focus should be on securing our border, while on the other hand, they risk turning off the lights at Border Patrol stations because they disagree with the president's immigration policies. Last year, I led a congressional delegation to McAllen, Texas, and to Lackland Air Force Base to see the humanitarian crisis on the border firsthand. My colleagues and I were heartbroken after seeing children as young as 7 years old in customs and border protection facilities. But what we also saw were hardworking border agents doing the best they could under difficult circumstances in an already stressed immigration system. These agents should know that we in Washington are going to give them the resources they need to do their jobs, not irresponsibly shut down the Department of Homeland Security for whom they work. Instead of threatening to shut down the government's primary Homeland Security agency, we should be working together to once again pass bipartisan, comprehensive immigration reform. Republicans and Democrats agree our immigration system is broken. With his executive action, President Obama took a step to bring millions across the country out of the shadows and keep U.S. citizens and their families together. Congressional action that puts families first is needed if we are to permanently fix our immigration system. The president's executive action helps millions of people across America by allowing certain students and families to register, work legally, and pay their taxes. His action is rooted in the reality that our immigration enforcement officers need to exercise discretion on who to go after with limited resources and in a broken immigration system. Those who oppose the president's action, which is reflected in the House Republican bill, say that the president and enforcement officers must act with absolutely no discretion. This position then contemplates and in fact supports the removal of nearly 12 million undocumented people from our country. This is paramount to a policy of mass deportation. If mass deportation were enacted, DHS would need an exponential increase in funding and resources, billions in increased spending without any permanent fixes or reforms is not a viable option. Even if we somehow had the resources to enact the policy of mass deportation, doing so would devastate our economy, removing millions of hardworking people that would be no longer working, running businesses, buying our goods and products would lead to over $2.5 trillion, $2.5 trillion of economic loss to our country in just a decade. Mass deportation is not a serious solution for immigration reform. It simply is not possible for DHS to remove every undocumented person from this country. Passing the House bill would just make life even harder for these people, many of whom are already living some of the hardest, and they are among the hardest working lives in our nation. As I mentioned, there are nearly 12 million undocumented people living in communities across America. Many have been living here for years or decades. They are parents, they are small business owners, and they are our neighbors and our children's classmates at school. They are people like Bianca, a woman who lives in Hawaii with her family. After moving to the United States on a visa over a decade ago, Bianca met her husband. They moved to the place they had always dreamed of living, Hawaii, naturally, and began a family there. Bianca and her husband's work visas were temporary, and like many immigrant families, they faced a tough decision to remain after their visas expired and continue building their life here in America. Bianca and her husband started with nothing. Today, they have 2 small businesses on Oahu and 4 American children born in the United States. Their businesses employ American citizens. They pay their taxes, and they work hard to provide for their families and be engaged in the community. Because of the president's order, Bianca and her family no longer live in fear every single day of being torn from the life that they have built in Hawaii. The House Republicans' mass deportation policy is a serious proposal in only one respect. It would result in serious negative consequences for our economy, our government, and millions of families in our country. In contrast, prioritizing deporting felons, not families and students, is simply common sense. And that is what the president's executive order does. Now is the time that we should be working together on common sense and comprehensive immigration reform that the vast majority of Americans support. Comprehensive immigration reform is supported by 70% of the American people. And last Congress, nearly 70% of the Senate supported our bipartisan immigration bill. Our bipartisan bill was a compromise. It strengthened border security, modernized our system, addressed visa backlogs, and allowed millions of undocumented people to step out of the shadows, get in line, and work towards becoming American citizens. Comprehensive immigration reform would have spurred economic growth in our country by over $100 billion per year, while helping to bring down the deficit. The only thing that kept this bipartisan reform bill from becoming law was the fact that Speaker Boehner refused to give the bill an up or down vote in the House. Recklessly shutting down the Department of Homeland Security will not fix our broken immigration system. Undoing the president's executive action will not fix our broken immigration system. We must work together, and we must fund the Department of Homeland Security so that they can continue to protect our country. And we must come together to pass common sense reform that Americans support. Both sides of the aisle agree we're a nation of immigrants and that our immigration system is broken. We don't need to shut down the Department of Homeland Security or round up and deport millions of families and individuals. We can start that process with a clean DHS funding bill, and I urge my Republican colleagues to bring one to the floor quickly. I yield the floor, Mr. President.